the camera at myself, I've done something with the sound, which is that I filtered out the background noise and tried to focus on my own voice. Hopefully this will make the sound better than usual, although tell me if there's any problems with that. I'm kind of curious how it sounds. Hey, Tai Nakamura, hi Quinn Rankid. I have not had the courage to upgrade to Windows 10. I've just had a busy day as well, which makes it hard to do. So yeah, Mr. Cordy Chap, in terms of, boom, indeed, the background noise, the fan from the PC and from conditioning and so on, it should be, people mention that they hear it and they don't like it. So I've just tried fixing that and hopefully it should be fixed. So let me know if that that makes a difference. You don't hear those, or you shouldn't hear it now anyway, because I'll fix the mic settings or I've applied some filters today. Really? You hear the fans on the PC? Or is that getting picked up? You should not be hearing that. Anyway, hopefully not. I'm looking at the mic indicator. It seems to only be reacting when I'm talking, so that seems to be a good. Anyway, that's an experiment. I also see that the live stream over here is working, because that didn't work last time I set this up. I had technical problems that also freaked me out. Of course, the main thing is if I upgrade to Windows 10, which I love the operating system. But if I do that, I am worried that I will lose my settings that I set up for this, which I do not want. So that's one other thing. This could be kind of a hassle to get. Every time I just tweak something goes wrong. Anyway, apologies for last week. I strained my back. I got on vacation 5 kilos overweight, unfit, and I went to the gym like 3 times in that week, and I overdid it. I went kickboxing, and I was overweight and unfit, and I overtrained, and I hurt my back. And the result was I was waking up in the spasms. I couldn't. It wasn't fun, and it meant I wasn't really sleeping very much, and they were coming late in the night, like 4 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the morning. So I decided last Sunday night it was better for me to go to sleep early and try to get as much sleep as I can, which turned out to work. It took about a week to come right. So much so I thought I was almost fixed. So I went to kickboxing and get on, and I kind of hurt myself again. As is the way, but slowly coming right anyway. So hey, Mr. Cordy Chip, so the mic is cutting out. That's not good. Well, that will be the so this is the effect of the sound filter which I am using. So yeah, see, it's cutting out. It's only cutting in when it detects that there's noise above a certain threshold. So that is, I wonder what I should do about this. I assume if I just keep talking non-stop, it won't cut out. But it's funny, I can see it reacting down there. Well, I think I can fix this on the fly. Yeah, technical issues. I don't want to, when you talk loud enough, it doesn't cut out. So I think, okay, let's also fix the noise gate. It's the attack time. This is really going to bring back all the noise from the background, but let's do that. Hold time, attack time. A little bit dangerous, but I'm playing with the sound features on the fly. Hopefully this will improve it. Hey, Odie Jr., good to see you. Believe in yourself. Good to see you. Let me know if perhaps what I just did, I just tweaked the time it takes to cut in when it detects my voice. If there continue to be problems, I'm just going to delete the filters that I'm using. But yes, indeed, Andrew Morboy, good to see you. Of course, we're working at the tennis tomorrow. All the best with that. I understand that there's been some rain around Melbourne. I hope that's improved the air and whatnot. But yes, definitely enjoy the tennis there. And yeah, I've got a bunch of topics, so I'd like to go through that. And yes, Probably not going to stay around too late. Chris Jack, good to see you, a long time. In fact, good to see you. I was actually thinking with the week off last week and the last minute start, I was wondering if anyone would show up, but lovely to see all you beautiful show up, so thank you for that. And let's get into the topic, shall we? Remember, as always, if you want to catch my attention, you just @Mark Vehicle Simon, so I can see Tai Nakamura did that, saying hi. The J-Vlog said, have I thought of getting a foot pedal like a piano for to talk feature? That's getting a little bit CV radio-ish, but right, if this doesn't work out very well, I am concerned that this is going to be cutting out every now and then. I see Believe in Yourself saying hi. I see Andrea Morboy talking to me there. So yes, indeed, still cuts out. Okay, well, you know what? Maybe I'll take the filters off. We'll come back. I'll try this again another time. So I am going to delete. And this is what it sounds like without filters. Oh, you know what? I did not save that just now. Did not need to. I deleted it. So now this is the sound without filtering. So it shouldn't cut out anymore, but I can see the indicator showing the humming of the background noise. If you prefer this sound, then I guess that is what you can do. I'll tell you what I could also do, although maybe this could be the end of the show. Honestly, I can't really do a Rubik's Cube properly. I learned how to do it off the videos that are on YouTube. I only know how to do it the easy way, which is a long way. It takes me about 5 or 6 minutes to do. But yeah. Interesting, the J-Vlog, no filters are good, the hum is acceptable. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I had some people leave a comment the other week complaining, and it made me think, can I fix it? And I checked and I thought maybe I could fix it. It is hard to get a perfectly silent room, of course, or a silent PC. I've got a high-powered computer beside me here. So yeah, if you're okay with a little bit of hum, there you go, Mr. Cordy Chap. Your worst nightmare right there. So, into the topics. First thing is, interesting fact, Japan has accepted 147 refugees since 2010, roughly around 20 per year. They actually went up to 30 last year, and the government's been taking polls and surveys to find out if the population of Japan, 120 million people, how they'd feel about increasing the number of refugees that they accept to 60. Now, bearing in mind that, the number of people displaced by conflict, people fleeing conflict and war and persecution, are of course tens of millions in the world, and Japan only accepting 30 of that and contemplating taking 30 more. Japan's frankly got a pretty disgraceful record around, they donate a lot of money to UN refugee agencies, but more or less they're paying to outsource the problem for other countries to deal with. So a survey to see if Japanese people would be okay with accepting more refugees. At least people seem to acknowledge that they don't take that there are very many right now. Still nearly half of people, 11% of people think that 30 is many, 19% is not few or many, and when they asked would they be willing to take more, 67% said that they fear worsening of public safety, 39% said cultural differences might make it worse. Basically they want to increase the number of refugees that they are allowed to stay in Japan to shelter from genocide or conflict or persecution to 60. And hey, 3Richie21, good to see you, and good night, Andrew, have a good evening there. And yes, in spite of that, people are worried about the social welfare cost, which is kind of weird. So yes, I'm glad again that immigration and the refugees are very politicized in Japan, but clearly Japan also, the government interested in defending its position of really doing nothing about this, which is kind of a shame. This came up the other week. The journalist who did this is the journalist Shiori Ito, who was actually the journalist from the Japan Me Too case, who sued a biographer of Abe, I believe a kind of famous author, for rape after police wouldn't prosecute in a case where she claimed that she had been raped by him. and she won the civil case recently. But she actually did a documentary. And these stories are not completely unknown or untold, but this is an interesting, just to watch this story. This is the testimony of a kid who was 11 years old at the end of World War II and was living in Manchuria. Specifically, he grew up, he was born in Japan, but as a small child moved along with 1.5 million other Japanese people into Manchuria. He said that he lived in Dalian, which was actually where the Manchurian Railway Company was based, although I believe that Dalian during that time was not actually treated as part of Manchuria. It was actually a Japanese run city, which Manchuria was, although some claimed a puppet state, which every colony was, I suppose, in the world at that time. But in any case, he was living in Manchuria with 4 siblings, and his parents at the end of the war. The Japanese government, of course, in its collapse at the end of the war, didn't have the resources or inclination to do anything to rescue or repatriate the millions of Japanese civilians that were living in China or in Manchuria at that time. And when the war ended, he tells the story that he went through the repatriation process, which took, I think it was in 1946 or 1947. It was more than a year after the war ended. The Chinese Civil War was starting between the nationalists that ran China and the communists, as well as the Soviet army had actually defeated the Manchurian army, which was a separate army to the Japanese, well, obviously backed by the Japanese. And so the Soviets had also come down and occupied Manchuria as well. And during the sort of time of chaos when the Japanese were being rounded up and finally being prepared for repatriation, he tells a story basically about how he had a baby sister, apparently 6 men. It's not clear. He doesn't actually tell in the story whether the men were Soviet soldiers or Chinese soldiers or whether they were fellow Japanese evacuees. But he said that they gave, as an 11-year-old, they gave the eldest son some medicine to give to the baby, which immediately killed the baby. It was clearly poison. And then, while in Dalian waiting for the relocation ships, he was also told to give medicine to his mother, which then caused her to foam at the mouth and die as well. So it appears he was tricked by other people into poisoning his sister and his mother. And in spite of that, he said the whole family, his other siblings, were sort of traumatized. They stayed by the dead mother. Eventually they were repatriated to Japan, and for 70 years he could never tell anybody about it, and he's just sort of telling the story now of what he went through. Of course, the story of Japanese left behind in China and in Korea, there are stories, it's not unwell known. Of course, the Japanese servicemen that were in Manchuria were mostly detained by the Soviets and sent off to Siberia, where they remained in Siberian concentration camps or gulag work camps well into the 1960s, more than 20 years after the war. So, this is a thing. This wasn't very long ago. This is the generation of people that would be old enough to be my parents' generation in Japan. Were often born outside of Japan. Were often went through this post-war, this sort of massive millions of Japanese civilians who were living outside of Japan, and who were stranded at the end of the war and went through a hell of a lot coming back. And I think probably in recognition of the circumstances that this was connected to the war and Japan's defeat, that people don't really linger and talk a lot about it. But you think about as a human event, it was really, really a remarkable time, only 1 or 2 generations removed from today. So, there are lots of stories like this, including, of course, there are millions of Japanese children who remained in China and were basically raised in orphanages in China as Chinese kids. And still, right now, there's a process in the Philippines, in China, of people there are projects and NGOs which are dedicated to helping identify Japanese orphans, civilian orphans who were left behind and not repatriated, and helping them when they grew up in China as Chinese people to now reconnect with their Japanese relatives, and sometimes even actually move to Japan. So, big thing. The story is very moving. I mean, it's a great video. I think it shows again. I understand that the person who found the video came across the video in the context of discussing the case of the journalist involved, but I'm not very familiar with her work, and this is good work. It's a moving story, and it's kind of funny. if you have Japanese, any connection to Japanese families, if you have spouses or homestays or anything like that, if you're willing to sit and listen respectfully, most Japanese families have stories like this. My host family of Fukuoka, were alive and remembered the war. I remember hearing about that. I stayed with my girlfriend's family for a number of months in Tokyo when I first got here, and both her parents, I believe, were born and grew up in Dalian. I never actually heard the story about the repatriation so much, but I've heard the story about my spouse, my wife's family, or her mother's story, and that family, they were in China, and in fact, she believes that her uncles, she has two uncles that were from mistresses that were Chinese and Korean, so they're mixed race. They all came back and lived with the father in Japan. But just a lot of stuff happening anyway. So that was the first thing I found interesting this week. Some kind of good news. It's hard to say that any number of suicides. This is the first time in recorded history that Japan has had less than 20,000 suicides in a year. Still a lot of suicides. Japan still has a high suicide rate as a country. And there's still complicated reasons as to why that is the case. But all of that said, fewer and fewer, which is a good thing, I suppose. In a way, I suppose that the bubble and burst phases of the economy are more or less over, and I think a lot of the social expectations associated with the, you think about it, you went straight from the war to the economic miracle to the bubble to the collapse of the bubble. There's pretty much been, and less than 100 years before all of those phases, you had a samurai culture, so I suppose Japan's always had kind of various reasons for the rate to be high. It's not really clear why the rate has become lower. Certainly the economy isn't better, but perhaps it's just the lack of extremes. I don't think there's much speculation in the article as to the reasons. And it is still high. And of course, in this case, Sora News has some links to, of course, the counselling services. It should be noted as well that while nothing in comparison, of course, to the domestic numbers, Japan is a very stressful place to be if you are not Japanese, and to adjust. And there are links, you can actually Google, there are English counselling services and so on, which you should definitely use. It's a good. It certainly is a good trend, and one that still has a long way to improve, but that's good to see. Of all the talk about Ghosn, which I'm not going to talk about at too much length, and of course I missed last week, so I was all set to talk about the escape in the box. I will talk a little bit about Ghosn tonight, but the first thing is, it was kind of interesting through all the debate. It's really been mostly expats sort of talking about it, at least in the online conversations, and a lot of assumptions as to what Japan Inc. thinks or does not think about this. So that Japanese man Yuta, actually, he did a good video. I do like his Pop Fox videos, and he went out and he actually got about a dozen Japanese. They're all Oji-sans for some reason. They're all guys, but he actually went around and asked them what they thought about Ghosn, what they thought about the escape, what they thought about the charges against him, what he thought about Nissan, what they thought about the claims about the Japanese justice system. And there were a variety of answers, but overall, maybe what I liked about it was everyone has showed that they're pretty well informed, and and everyone has, even people who are not siding with Ghosn and see him sort of as a criminal, and they're still capable of recognition, critical thinking towards the justice system and his complaints. Fundamentally, a lot of people have take issue with the fact that he's a rich guy looking to get away with what, seeking privileged treatment and seeking to get away with it. When people feel bad for the workers at Nissan, they people also said that Nissan itself also seemed as wrong. But the Sergeant Bilko, the hum is. The Sergeant Bilko, let me bring you up to speed. I was using sound filters to try to get rid of the AC noise and the computer. And when I did, it was causing my voice to cut out, and everyone was willing to tolerate a little bit of a background hum. I am actually on a UFO. That is actually the truth. And so as a result, I turned off all the filters that I added to cut out the background humming noise. So yes, believe in yourself is sort of astounding. The system is the way that it is. Well, I assume you're talking about the Japanese justice system. Yeah, that's true. I mean, in a way, one thing is, of course, Japan. Everything that Japan has is not based on the same evolution and the same reasons as the background noise enhancers. It's not based on the same history and background as the Western system. And Japan did try to wholesale import the Western system, but at the same time, you could argue for all the differences. Japan is safe, and it's a relatively law-abiding society. And I think a lot of people in Japan feel like the outcome, the flaws in the justice system, are a trade-off for the extraordinary public safety that Japan has, at least relatively speaking. People would still say it's not worth it. There are certainly some people critical of it, but certainly for me, I think, as happens with a lot of things in the Japanese government, the status quo, the outcome, is often used as a justification for not addressing things that need to be addressed within bureaucratic and government systems, which is frankly the lack of sophistication of the police and the and the Japanese prosecutorial system. They're not good at investigating. They're not good at getting evidence. They're good at holding people until they confess whether they did things or not, and they're good at exercising psychological pressure on people. And certainly there is a great fear of doing something to get arrested for, and that works. But if you're ever innocently or mistakenly identified, it's a really, really horrible system to get locked up into. And again, it's intentional. It's partly deterrence. But certainly the system here has flaws, as does every system, but the Japanese system has some particular flaws that I think can be obviously fixed. So yes, Tai Nakamura, congratulations indeed. I did see, I don't know, well, I guess you posted on Facebook, so it's relatively public, but surprising and happy news. Tai Nakamura, congratulations. Hope you crazy cats get out here on some kind of honeymoon type arrangement at some point. Would be good to see. But congratulations indeed. Good point, Sergeant Bilko. That's the suicide thing. Another kind of depressing story. This is an Australian journalist who, after being fired from SBS for, which is really neither here nor there, it turns out he came to Japan. And with a Japanese wife and 2 kids, and as unfortunately happens in more than 50% of international marriages in Japan, things didn't work out so well, and he ended up not in a state of divorce, but kind of in a separation situation where the wife decided to take the kids and go to the mother's house. This happens universally, but of course what typically happens in these situations is that there is a right of parental access, and generally you could go to when you arrange a divorce, or even in a separation case, you would arrange for access to the kids. Again, in most Western and OECD countries, there is a recognition of the harm that can be caused by parental alienation syndrome when access to a parent is withheld, particularly in the case of when the parents are not getting along. However, in Japan, there's no recognition of that. In fact, the common sense upon which the Japan legal and family law system is based is that it could actually be more detrimental to the kids and confusing to the kids to have access to a parent who's not there all the time, as well as disruptive to the kids' upbringing. I think this is partly due to the fact that traditionally, families in Japan have not been nuclear families. They've been extended families. So even when one parent takes the kids, the child will be raised by the grandparents and the extended family, which isn't so much the case anymore. But in any case, it appears in this case involving this Scott McIntyre, this Australian journalist case, who was a resident in Japan. The wife took the kids. Apparently part of the claim that she had was, which he denies, is that there was violence towards a daughter. Again, this is why of all the types of law that I'm familiar with, family law is not an area I'd ever want to go near. But so they were denying him access, and he was seeking access during the typhoon where he was living in Japan. He asked the police to do a welfare check on the family, which they refused to go and do. So he, assuming that the wife and the kids were staying with the in-laws, he went to their apartment building, and apparently while he was kind of staking out the building, hoping to spot his kids and check in hopes of checking that they were okay, he followed probably a resident or someone, maybe a delivery person, going into the building, into the common area that most apartment buildings have on the bottom floor. He followed them through the security gate, and was in the lobby, the common lobby of the apartment building. Apparently the in-laws, when they became aware that he was there, they called the police to come and get him and charge him with trespassing, and he was charged with trespassing. He was held for 9 months and was given a trial where he was given a 6-month suspended sentence. In fact, how long was he detained? Maybe it wasn't 9 months, but it was a number of months that he was in jail. Apparently the same jail that Ghosn was put into. So he was given a suspended 6-month sentence, but so he was, he was held at the police station before he was sent to a detention center. Does it say how long he was held? It does not. But yeah. In any case, he was held for a time, and he was given a suspended sentence for trespassing. He's pointed out, he's held a press conference about this, that this is the problem here is the Japanese family law system, which does not grant or recognize the access of a non-custodial parent, or joint parental custody, or the concept of parental alienation syndrome. This is, of course, something that there have been moves where there have been Japanese people, mostly fathers. It's almost always mothers, but again, not always mothers that get the sole custody. But in Japan, it's almost always sole custody. And there are people who have been challenging the system, although it still doesn't have a lot of momentum in Japan in spite of the increasing divorce rate, and which is again probably a reflection that most Japanese people understand and accept that when you divorce in Japan, you divorce the entire family. Which isn't to say that there aren't arrangements which are informal and not enforced by courts where parents do have access in the case of divorce, but generally speaking, they don't have this sort of presumed right. And yes, he's gone and he's called it Stop Parental Child Abduction. Generally, this is kind of mixing two issues. The other one I've talked about before, which is when you have a divorce and a custody dispute, and a parent trying to get an advantage in a custody dispute will actually take the child across borders to a different country where they can get a conflicting custody order in favor of themselves. And this is very common in Japan, where family courts will usually only give custody to one parent. So if you can get them to Japan, you can get an order in your favor. The other problem, of course, with the Hague system is that even where there is a joint custody order in, for example, Australia or America, if you take the kid to Japan, what's been happening in practice, although Japan was pressured into signing up to the Hague Convention, and the Hague Convention requires courts to to enforce valid family court orders from other countries within Japan, which Japan can't do. There's no enforcement system here, or recognition of joint custody. The other thing is that they're supposed to, in the case of a dispute, order the return of the kids to the original jurisdiction to have it decided there, or at least the jurisdiction of the habitual residence. So that's presuming that the kids don't become too well established in the new country, in which case they'll do the dispute in the new country under the old country's rules, which again, Japanese courts are pretty much incapable of because the family law system here is so different. But yeah, this is the problem, that the Japanese law system, even though Japan has joined the Hague Convention, it still is a safe haven for child abduction because the way the family law system here works, it just incentivizes it. So yes, that is a thing that happened this week, and it's an interesting story. It's an issue I've talked about before, and this is another angle on it, which is not that this wasn't a cross-border child abduction. This was an international marriage breakup, which isn't even actually properly broken up. But it shows again the situation that you have here, that the custodial parent has all, normally the mum has all the rights here. Another interesting article here on Japan's labour productivity, lowest in the G7, not the OECD. To be clear, I'm looking at the OECD. Japan is still more productive than New Zealand, but I could dig into all the factors of how they measure this, but it does seem intuitive. It is interesting. Ireland, Norway, the most productive per hour. Ireland, I do have an image of being kind of, the famous for being hardworking and traveling. The United States, I understand. The Scandinavian countries, I have more of an image, particularly like you take Norway, for example. They got rich off just drilling a lot of oil. Not to say that they don't undoubtedly work hard, but I do have an idea of welfare countries as often having less. Well, again, maybe that's the reason why they have lower working hours with high output. So I guess it's that ratio that it's judged on, whereas Japan has high work hours, whether or not there's high output. So that could be it. Interesting to see Australia much higher than Japan, which is itself much higher than South Korea and New Zealand, for example. What's going on with Mexico? So interesting stats there. Japan often gets called out as being, having lowest productivity. It's kind of funny when you look at it in this context. It is below the UK and Canada and Italy, but not all that different, and it's actually not such quite a standout as you might think when you compare it to more countries like this. But yes, it is interesting that you end up with that, and I've always given my view that that's partly just because when you work for Japanese companies, you realize right away the incentive to be more productive, to figure out quicker, faster, better ways of doing things are actually not very high. In fact, sometimes they're actually discouraged. There's a lot of cultural emphasis on the idea of doing everything completely and properly. Mr. Cordy Chap, does New Zealand produce anything? Yes, it does. Geniuses. Great Australian actors also. Pretty much every good thing to come out of Australia mostly comes from New Zealand. And wool, of course. And we also produce the cutest sheep in the world, as everybody knows. Taro Aso by name and by nature. We've talked about him before. Butter indeed. Don't get me started. Aso by name and by nature. Honestly, it'd be bigger news if there was a day when he did not. They do indeed produce equal assignments. It'd be bigger news if there was a day when Taro Aso did not do a kind of alarming, politically incorrect gaffe. So I think the context was he was talking about recent, including praising the Japan rugby team and the recent diversification of Japan, but also saying that the success of Japan has been the fact it's been a generally homogenous country. In fact, not even generally. He said it's been a homogenous, single language, single culture country until now. Which immediately had people saying that, the cabinet just passed, a law formally recognizing the Ainu people and the other minorities that exist within Japan. How can a deputy prime minister be claiming that Japan has no minorities all of a sudden and that this is some secret to success? So of course he retracted the statement and said he didn't mean it. I mean, it's the hokey pokey. He puts his left foot in, he takes his left foot out, he puts his left foot in, and he shakes it all about. It's pretty much how it works. Look, I mean, sure, Japan is certainly more homogenous than a lot of countries. But, you kind of know what he means, but, he should know better than to say it, right? You're still going to offend a whole bunch of people. Yes, I like him much more when he's not actually having any power or in government. A couple of Japanese naming gaffes, or possibly not even gaffes this week. I think this is fantastic. The new Subaru Fox. It is basically, this is a special edition Forester. The Forester GT SUV. So, this is the Forester Ultimate Customized Kit Special Edition. I'm a big fan of Subarus. Fuji Heavy Industries, actually, same group as Toyota, although different background, of course, but they make great cars. The Forester, a bit of a chunky station wagon, but they make a big fan of the Impreza STI. And yes, they thought for a recent motor show, I believe was it in Singapore, they showed this thing off. The Taipei International Auto Show, they wanted to give them an extra special Forester. So yes, there's the Forester Ultimate Customized Kit Special Edition. And I mean, I don't know, I would like to get the car just simply to say that my Subaru Fox. I mean, good name. And SDI is what, I never even thought about that Subaru Fox. Is this an STI? Because STI is awesome, and I don't actually, Technica International, not It's funny, it was in Australia also, we used to talk about STDs as being long distance phone calls when I was a kid. And there's often commentary within Australia, the confusion caused, saying that someone got an STD from somebody else. I think it was a standard transfer dial was what we used to call long distance numbers, and that's obviously fallen out of favour, and I suppose maybe Sabara needs to think about STI as well. But yeah, look, it sounds fast, doesn't it? To tell you the truth, not really my bag in terms of if you had a Forester, I'd prefer it to be. I'm not sure this is the hot station wagon that I would like, but the name, I mean, geez, they should apply that to an Impreza anyway. I'd get an Impreza Fux anytime. Although I guess I'd have to figure out a different word for the F. Anyway, that's the thing. So yes, of course it's challenging coming up with names within the Japanese culture for products that, generally somewhere, I mean, who knows, you might have, for example, the Scotch whiskey might in Swahili mean something obscene. I mean, how can you possibly make sure that you cover off the thousands and thousands of languages in the world and make sure that you haven't made a faux pas or a mistake in the meaning in another language? I mean, it's difficult. I was a big fan. I remember in the 1980s, the Mitsubishi Starion was a great car. They had TV commercials of it with running horses, and people were thinking no, they didn't, and it turned out yes, they did. It was they didn't realize how to spell stallion, and who can blame them? I mean, you can't understand, and some things just aren't in the dictionary. What's interesting here is that the CEO of McDonald's Japan is a woman. I can't remember her first name. It's like let's call her Amanda for the sake of Amanda Casanova. So Casanova, the CEO of Japan, decided that McDonald's wants to give everyone a cream pie, and they look delicious. I mean, who wouldn't want one, right? Straight from Ronald McDonald, right on everybody. Karen, yeah, call her Karen. We'll call her Karen Casanova. She wants everybody to get a cream pie, and why not? I mean, they're affordable, they're delicious. Cream pies for everybody. We can be like Oprah. So that's another thing that's happening in Japan this week. There's been for a long time this idea about with the demographic changes in Japan, how of course what you're going to end up with is with fewer kids and fewer young people, and this overwhelmingly large number of elderly people. And although young people don't get to vote until they reach a certain age, elderly of course can vote even when they lose their minds and live on social welfare for 30 years. There's no cutoff, although there's a cutoff at the start, there's not at the end. And there's always this thing which when the baby boomer glut, as that moved through society, that they would start to throw around their weight for their selfish benefit as pensioners. I remember hearing in the 90s when I was taking Japanese that there would be people who were expecting and predicting that there would be intergenerational conflict of young people resenting elderly people, trying to regulate them, taking advantage of their political power. And again, Japan, where you have probably the most advanced or the most rapidly advancing elderly society, some rural parts of Japan, they are out there, politicians are claiming votes by campaigning on the political issues that really matter, which is that kids nowadays spending too much time on those dang nabbed smartphones playing internet games, and mustn't this be stopped? So yes, Western Japan, was this Gifu? Where was this? Kagawa Prefecture has passed an ordinance which doesn't have any enforcement mechanism, but it is a rule that kids of below high school age are required to play no more than 60 minutes of video games per day, and 19 minutes on Saturday, Sunday public holidays, and they're not allowed to use devices after 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. if they're from high school. This is old, basically trying to regulate against the young, and it's kind of ridiculous. Again, if you talk about social harm, how about pensioners spending money on pachinko, which is illegal in the first place? Remember, it's fake legal. What about restricting people receiving public pensions from spending more than 60 minutes per day at a pachinko parlor? Or at all, right? What about the requiring all people over 65 to be at home asleep after 9 p.m. From pachinko? No, they're not going to regulate themselves. They're going to regulate young people. I mean, this is where we literally last year had nightclubs pass laws that nightclubs have to be brightly lit. I mean, they regulated everything except enough space for the baby Jesus between dances. And now they're regulating how long kids can play video games. Like, did they ever regulate the time that kids could read manga or play Game Boys during the bubble or whatever? It's ridiculous. And the thing is, the Osaka mayor heard this and thought it was such a good idea that they're considering putting similar measures in Osaka. Again, it's sure to be a vote winner, because the last thing you want is those pesky kids on your lawn causing trouble. And you know what? If you are a young person or you are in Kagawa, come to Tokyo. Seriously, like, Tokyo is like a refugee island. All the young people are coming here, and again, this is another thing that the government sees as a problem. They're trying to regulate to try to keep young people in the prefectures for this bullshit. I mean, seriously, Tokyo is the only place with a relative demographic balance. And and this is pretty much, they're complaining that they're becoming full of elderly people with no one to look after them. Well, who the hell would want to look after them if they're going to regulate young people like this? It's kind of crazy, if you ask me. So, Kagawa-ken, seriously, ridiculous. This is something I've talked about before. You may be surprised to know that in Japan, a lot of people believe that you are not allowed to quit your job without your company's permission. I think I've told the story that I've been in this position myself, where when I gave my notice, I was told you do not have permission to leave at my second job in Japan, which was awkward and weird, and I was kind of, well, give my notice, and then I was given a warning when I started preparing to leave. I was kind of like, dude, I've offered to help you hire you, you haven't taken it, but I've told you. But this is the thing, it's pretty widely misunderstood in Japanese society. One, that you need to get permission from your boss to quit, and people are often who are in nightmare jobs working to death, and they give their notice and they're still told they're not allowed to leave for 9 months or 12 months or something like that. And of course, the other thing is just the whole power relationships often mean, particularly in bullying and harassing workplaces, that even when they're aware that they have the right to give notice, they're so afraid of the backlash, or that they're going to get hazed or bullied when they give the notice, that yes, there are companies that make money, good money, simply doing what anybody is entitled to do, which is statutorily giving 1 month. And by the way, unless you agree to this in a contract, most contracts in Japan say that you're required to give 3 months notice to quit. Not most, but a large number. But most, by law, the default is 30 days, 1 month notice is all you need to give to quit a job. And all you got to do is say you want to quit, and that's it. But this is hard for most people to do. So there's a good business for companies that go and deliver the news from anti-confrontational people. And again, this is seen as something that millennials are doing. It's frankly a healthy thing that is happening. And labor market fluidity, it's slowly coming along, but it's partly based on the fact that people don't even know if they're allowed to quit, so they go to these companies, and these companies, the great thing is about that, by having companies that are specialists in this, that of course they can also both give advice to the person who wants to quit, to give them assurance, as well as not take any crap from the companies that they're giving the notice to. So it does make sense in Japan that you would actually have companies like this, although again, what you really need is the population to be a little bit better informed themselves. I suppose that the news and TV and so on, for whatever reason, doesn't want to give documentaries explaining to people that they can quit. I mean, occasionally they do labor and power harassment and stuff like that. But it is weird that people are so unaware of the labor rights that they have in Japan. I mean, so yes, how much does it cost? That's a good question. Let's have a look. Maybe it says. So they'll come in, there we go, charges 3万yen, so US dollars 278 for the service. But yeah, it's basically right. And this is also part of, they can go and negotiate with the company and make sure that you get all of your your taishoking, which you're entitled to. Your when you separate from a company, you're entitled to a payout of money. So yeah, making sure that you get all your benefits and they don't get ripped off and that they don't do anything wrong. That's the business. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good business. Where do they advertise? Well, they're advertising right here. I'm advertising them for free. There's something wrong with that. I should be getting paid for this. So that's the thing. Anyway, Sakura, the long range forecast has just come out. I'm aware of the arms race that's happened around the YouTube Hanami. I still I subscribe to the theory that Kuni had back when he was running it, that if you don't live in Tokyo and you want to know 3 months in advance so that you can plan for travel and for vacation from work to be able to come to Tokyo to attend the Tokyo Hanami, screw you. Honestly, screw you, upside down against the wall, screw you. Hanami is for looking at the flowers, and you don't know when the flowers are actually going to bloom until like the week before. And scheduling a Hanami for a time where there are no flowers is like ridiculous. And yet the pressure, there's always been this pressure from people outside of Tokyo that sure, where they live they want to do Hanami when the flowers are out, but when it comes to going to Tokyo, they want to do it as a social event. They don't care if there are flowers there or not. They demand that the Tokyo people hold the event at a time that there might not be flowers. And the pressure to do this, when I ran the Hanami, of course, was always kind of again, there were people who were I got all sorts of complaints from people who didn't want to attend if Tikyo-san was there. I told them to F off, by the way. They told me that they wanted me to schedule it for a time that would work better with their calendar so that they could arrange travel from other parts of Japan. To which again, you have Hanami where you are. I always push back against it. I took a lot of flack for it. But of course, people who want to do this have come in, and indeed Sergeant Bilko. So of course, when you get into this arms race of people, then when I let go of it, of course now we've had multiple Hanamis and different organisers sort of competing for attention, which has driven the desire to set a fixed date earlier and campaign around that. And I know that we've just set the date, which I believe I remember hearing from Phoenix 787. Zach, he was asking me for my view. He was going to set the date. Look, he's the guy who lays out the tarps. He sits out there in the rain. He takes the responsibility for dealing with all the people who can never really be satisfied. So to me, fine, you get to decide. I don't want the responsibility. But yes, he was like, should we do it in the first week of April or the last week of March? And I reiterated, I think it's ridiculous to set a date 4 months in advance to begin with, because this discussion took place in December. I said, but if you do it every year, it's going to be earlier than, it's getting earlier lately. Do it in the last week of March, not the first week of April, because you could end up in the first week of April with no flowers at all. It can be done. If you're too early, there'll always be something. Better to be too early than too late. So I said, do it in the last week of March. However, peak bloom this year is going to be earlier than usual. The first long-range forecast now predicts, and this is a long-range forecast which could still be completely wrong, but if you're in Tokyo, the predicted date is going to be, it's 3/25, so it is roughly the last week, but could arguably be that you could actually do a proper Hanami even in the second to last week of March. So that is the thing that is happening. Do it in February. But you know what? In February 29, you get the ume blossoms, you get the plum blossoms, which come out. There'll be things to look at. So it actually does make more sense to do it in February than it does to do it in April lately. Anyway. So yes, I believe that the current planned schedule date for the Hanami is going to be, and does it say here, Tokyo peak time 3/19? Oh, that's when it starts, on the 19th. But I believe it's going to be like the 27th or something like that the current plan is. So yes, look out for information on Facebook. I'll be sharing information when it's around, but I believe the plan is the last week of March at the moment. If you want to come here for the Hanami, it doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work. I'm not sure what my own plans are going to be, because I'm going to have relatives in Japan at the time. But yes. Mr. Cordy Chap. There are different types of flowers that bloom at different times, and there are some which actually come out early. There are the Hayazakura and the Ume, which come out generally late February and early March. So yeah, you can actually, I think it actually makes more sense then. Plus the weather is generally better. So that's a thing, and that's happening. Carlos Ghosn's press conference. I watched the whole thing. I was going to offer an opinion on it in the show last week, but yeah. Offering that opinion now. I wasn't that impressed. I mean, look, he has legitimate complaints about the justice system, but you really lose your right to complain when you pay mercenaries to hide you inside, to smuggle you inside of audio equipment and sneak you out on a private jet to where did he go? He went to Turkey and then Beirut, where he violated Japan's immigration law. He violated his bail, which in itself he had to fight hard to get. He violated the laws of Turkey, the way that he went through, and it seems now that he's in Lebanon, he's also broken laws in Lebanon, not least of which he's trespassing. The current home that he's staying at in Lebanon is actually he purchased for himself using Nissan money. So Nissan is trying to get him evicted right now because Nissan claims ownership of the house that he's staying in. And that's the thing. Plus, of course, as the president of Renault and Nissan, he did business with Israel, as of course everyone can and should do, just as they can trade with anyone else. But of course, this violates the Arab boycott of Israel, which Lebanon is a part. And so there are people in Lebanon who want to prosecute Ghosn in Lebanon for violating the boycott of Israel, which is not, to me, a good reason to prosecute him. But at the same time, it kind of means that he's been banned from leaving Lebanon, and he's going to face trouble wherever he is. I do think that he's never had the chance to clear himself. Of course, you should be innocent until proven guilty, but the allegations hanging over him, including the misuse of funds for his daughter's wedding, which he tried to explain during the press conference, but through that Omani trading company, his wife's super yacht company. His wife has also been charged with perjury, by the way. Through Nissan's accounted for $4 million that they think he personally embezzled, and Renault's also found misappropriation of funds, and he hasn't. His response to this has been, I mean, look, I'm sympathetic with his claims about the Japanese justice system, and don't forget that I think Paul Kelly is his name, or Greg Kelly. Paul Kelly or Greg Kelly, the other person charged from Nissan, is still back in Japan in detention, and what chance does he have now? But running away is going to make things 10 times worse for whoever comes next, and it does look to me like, apart from the fact he's clearly broken the law now, how is he supposed to clear his name? He's lost all his credibility, and he'll be remembered not as a great car CEO, and he'll never clear his name from this. He'll be remembered as an embezzler, who stole money, who abused the power of his position, who did good things with Nissan but abused his power and misappropriated money for himself, and is now hiding as a refugee in Lebanon, which he's not allowed to leave. So I think he's hurt himself. Like I say, I was sympathetic to his case. I think that the postponed Hey Theodore, I think that the case, and Chris Lane, Venturi 3D, good to see you. Indeed, I can't wait for the movie about this. I think it will be a good movie. This has got to be a movie. The delayed compensation, I believe, is something that every CEO should be charged with. We've just had a case just yesterday that Toshiba has a subsidiary, an IT digital services subsidiary, that has a claimed revenue of 440 million. They just discovered that 200 million of that is from fictitious transactions, and that they're going to do a corrective statement after an internal investigation. So if you find out that a company faked $200 million of its $400 million revenue, how is no one from that company being arrested when Ghosn's being charged simply for board-approved delayed compensation after he's done with his term at Nissan? clearly there are double standards, mistreatment. Clearly the charges. There's never been a case brought in Japan on the charge that he was brought up with, which he was detained for like 18 months waiting for trial, and the prosecutors were trying to delay the trial to get him to break, pretty much. It was ridiculous, and I felt sympathy over that. But in the end of the day, there were a number of charges to answer, which it seems that not just Nissan, which clearly you could argue was out to get him, but also Renault, which was kind of standing up for him in the beginning. A lot of his allies have kind of come out and also turned on him with claims of embezzlement, and rather than answer them, in the end of the day, for whatever legitimate reasons, he ran, and in the course of running, he broke the law, and he's going to be remembered as a fugitive forever. I don't see he's going to get out of this. So, Theodore Sharp, it's probably how the Toshiba thing looks. What happens more often in Japan is you get these Junkan Toriki, which is, 200 million is kind of ridiculous. A Junkan Toriki is a circular transaction. What happens is you get some friendly sales reps from different companies that trade with one another. Typically what you'll get is like, for example, a printer, $1,000 printer. Maybe you'll have 10 of these. And say that you're not going to make your sales target for this quarter and you need some help. So your buddy from another company, you talk to him and say, hey, can we put on the books a transaction where I lease for you 10 printers, and you'll get basically a circular chain of suppliers who will agree to on-lease these 10 printers, and when they on-lease them, they've only got to add a little bit of margin to it just to make it a legitimate transaction which they can book. So they'll sell, for example, for $100, they'll sell it for 110 each. So 10 of those, $100 profit, 1,000, only gets marked on the books. Nothing actually gets moved to company B. Then the company B guy has already agreed with the C guy that they've got to move it off the books quickly because the stocks aren't there, and he'll claim the benefit of also having made the sales, which he hasn't actually made. And they'll sell it to C, and then C will sell it to D, and then D will sell it back to A again. And what they'll do is they'll keep putting on a little 10% commission without there actually ever being, the printers will never actually move. In fact, sometimes they don't even exist. The problem is that if the stock ever stays still and there's a stock accounting, somebody's going to get caught. It's like a hot potato or pass the parcel. When the music stops, you can't be left as the one holding the transaction. So what starts as a you scratch your back, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine kind of arrangement among salespeople from different companies, to in a circular transaction motion, keep adding commissions on something that starts out as a low price, but it ends up that these end up being like $1 million printers, and they keep adding commission until someone discovers that half of their revenue is based on these empty circular transactions. And it happens in Japan because you have these very cooperative salespeople and supply chains. I suspect that's probably what happened in Toshiba. This happens a lot in those big Japanese conglomerates. More likely than a drug deal, but who knows? They could have actually just made it up, which would be even more criminal, actually, and arguable that leadership should have noticed when 200. Financial statements generally should be filed in the non-fiction section of the library, not the fictional section of the library. So that's a problem. That's Ghosn's apartment. Which is actually not Ghosn's apartment, it's Nissan's apartment, and they're trying to evict him right now. So that's a thing. Toyota's building the city of the future near Mount Fuji, where they're going to be trialing new technologies, including self-driving cars. That'll be pretty cool. Japan, which already has a crazy low crime rate, I guess they're counting Ghosn on this for now. All-time low in 2018, so that's a thing. Income tax. You want to know what the tax burden for income tax and pension contributions in Japan is? As you can see there, income tax is super low, among the lowest in the world actually. However, you have mandatory and employee social security contributions, and Japan is still actually pretty good there. Australia, by contrast, only has employer contribution and income tax. The combination of income tax and pension contributions, where it's deducted, is pretty high, but still tax is pretty good in Japan, relatively speaking. So that's a thing, and that's all my topics for tonight. We are over time. I hope you enjoyed it. It's good to have you back. I'm sorry that the sound filter thing didn't work. As a result, I am flying on the UFO, as you all mentioned. It still has been good talking to you. I got an itchy throat at one point, and my nose got kind of itchy at one point, but I fought through it. I got through it. Good to see you all. I will be doing this every week. It's good to see you. I'm going to be going to sleep. And remember, if you, hey, 3Richie21, really appreciate it. Remember, if you enjoyed the show, remember to hit the like button. I do appreciate it when you do that. And I'll be back 10:40 p.m. Japan Standard Time next week. And see you again soon. Boom. Peace. In stream.